Welcome to Volleyball State, your look at volleyball in 6 rotations. Here are your hosts, Jeff Sheldon and Lincoln Arneal.
Hello and welcome to Volleyball State, a look at the sport of volleyball in 6 rotations and a proud part of the Hurrdat Sports family. I'm Jeff Sheldon, joined as always by Lincoln Arneal, and we got a big show today. We go in a couple of different directions in a very full 6 rotations. Who says it's the off season? There's no off season. We're into the month of June, and a lot of great stuff is happening in the world of volleyball. In fact, the U.S. Olympic roster is out. Came out a couple of weeks ago. A lot of familiar names are going to be headed to Paris to help the U.S. try for a second straight gold medal, but the Americans not exactly firing on all cylinders in their Paris tune-up matches. We're going to take a look at the roster and some of Team USA's recent performances. Also, Nebraska volleyball coach John Cook signs a lucrative new deal with some very interesting incentives that give him the ability to ride off in the sunset, literally, but no indication that that's happening anytime really soon. What we really want to talk about today, though, this is sort of our first ever Volleyball State recruiting spectacular. Nebraska and all college programs can begin making offers for the class of 2026. That's players going into their junior year of high school this fall. They can start doing that on June 15th, which may be before or after you're listening to this program, depending on when that download happened for you. For us in our universe, that's this Saturday when those conversations can begin. So we're going to talk about Nebraska's national recruiting targets for the class of 2026, as well as the state of Nebraska's top in-state prep players with Austin Kingsley of prepdig.com. Man, that's a mouthful. First, Lincoln, I want you to tell the folks where they can find us online, give the listeners a heads up of what you're working on as well in what is probably a pretty busy time in your life.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And we also going to talk about Nebraska's full Big Ten schedule just dropped.
Oh, that's right. That happened too.
As we record this on Wednesday, we're dropping today, this afternoon. So we'll talk about that as well. But you can find out all the late breaking news on Twitter at Volleyball Pod. We also have a TikTok account. So hopefully you saw some of the preview clips that we dropped on that. You can follow me on Twitter at Lincoln_VB. And I write up all of the articles, late breaking news, and kind of the day-to-day coverage at HuskersIllustrated.com. So that's where you can
find me on social media at by Jeff Sheldon, BY Jeff Sheldon, where you can see this time of year how much I miss breaking news like that. Lincoln texted me earlier this afternoon, said, "Hey, the schedule's out." And I'm like, "What schedule?" I thought that the schedule had actually already been released, but we were prepared to talk about the ABA First Serve, and we will talk about that high-profile event that Nebraska is in, plus the full Big Ten schedule as well has been released. But first, we're going to start not with the upcoming season, but we're going to look way into the future, into some players that might be joining the Nebraska roster in a couple of years. Rotation 1, we start out with Nebraska's 2026 recruiting plans. These are players, once again, going into their junior year of high school. Recruiting offers can be made, contact can be made starting on June 15th for those players. And just to give you a heads up, as far as the roster shakes out right now, this would be coming into a season where Nebraska would just be losing middle blocker Rebecca Alec and outside hitter Taylor Landfair would be the highest profile losses. As long as everything sort of went according to the current scholarship schedule, we know that transfers happen. We know that college rosters are kind of like playing Yahtzee every single year now. And Nebraska is not immune to that as well. But that makes, nailing your high school recruiting just as important as ever.
But we'll finally be done with all the COVID years too. We'll just be done. All you play is 4 years. We know it's a lot easier to plan. Don't have to, are they coming back for a 5th year? So we'll be done.
You know what could happen though? I mean, I've never said this on the podcast before, but there's probably some court cases out right now that are going to do away with, that could potentially do away with the 4-year maximum. I mean, what if, and I have heard this come up on things before. What if we eventually lived in a world where like you could play college volleyball as long as you wanted to, as long as there was a spot for you on a roster? Like you could be 31 and playing college volleyball. I bet we see that sometime in our lifetimes.
I don't look forward to that. That's just, if they're managing 12 scholarships right now, that sounds like an even bigger headache and even sounds more like professional volleyball. But we'll save that for our special compliance themed episode. We'll
which will get 3 downloads. It'll be you, me, and Jonathan Bateman or something.
It's great. Good. Well, let's talk about. Let's go to that. So when you mentioned the two players that Nebraska's losing, Rebecca Alec and Taylor Landfair, to me that also then kind of figures out who they're going to take positionally too, and look at who Nebraska has. Again, take all of this with a grain of salt because transfers happen, but looking at the positional needs, I think Nebraska is kind of in that mode of you want to take an outside hitter every single year and kind of have 4 or 5 outside hitter a pipeline ready to produce, and also they'll be down to 2 middle blockers on the roster at that point. I think Andy Jackson will be entering her senior year for when the 2026 class joins. And then they'll also have their newest recruit, Minaya Ochibe. I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me, but the newest commit that they'll have, she'll be in her sophomore year. So I think they'll want a middle blocker too.
And this would be the players who were freshmen last year. So Bergen Riley and Harper Murray, this would be their senior years, 2026. Or this would be their 4th year of eligibility. Maybe they're not all seniors.
Yes.
But yeah, so Nebraska might not be looking for a setter in this class, but you always need outsides. You always need middles. And that's really what we think that Nebraska is going to focus on in throwing out some offers to some big time players here in a couple days.
Yeah, and opposite could be another thing because Ryan Hunter will be a sophomore. We'll see kind of what she's coming off of an ACL injury right now, but that's a couple years down the road. So, but I think for sure, based on numbers, they're probably going to take an outside hitter and middle blocker as well too. So you start putting together a list of who Nebraska could be reaching out to, who they're possibly recruiting. You actually look to last year, who came to Nebraska's camp, who's been to Lincoln too, and I think that's a very good projection of people that are interested in Nebraska too. If they're paying their money to kind of show up in front of coaches and kind of show their abilities and prove that they are interested, that's a good list. And Nebraska attracts a top tier of talent. But just on their Dream Team camp, I went to one of the 2 days of the Dream Team camp, and I saw multiple top 10 commits or top 10 prospects that were in Lincoln, kind of trying to show off and show out for the coaches too. So
that's in July every year, right?
Yeah, typically, I said Nebraska has 2 different sessions of camps, and that's kind of in July too, because you can have those recruiting conversations if there's any uncommitted. That's where Ryan Hunter came last year, and she was the only uncommitted prospect that, as a rising junior, that performed. It's a lot of freshmen and sophomores going to be, but she came and they liked what they saw, and they could have those recruiting conversations. So that's why you have it after June 15th.
So Lincoln, this is a world that you live in a little more clearly than I do at this point. So I'd love for you to take the listeners through some potential prospects for Nebraska who I imagine the names on the list that I'm looking at here have come to Nebraska's Dream Team camp before. Many of them have numbers by their name that would indicate not only that they are really tall, but also that they are some of the highest rated prospects in the country by recruiting services within their class. So as you would expect, based on the last several years, many years, Nebraska is going to be making a run at some of the very best recruits in the country.
Yeah, and the problem is, I think 6 different outside hitters. Nebraska's probably going to take 1 or 2, so they're going to try to swing for the fences and see, or swing down the pipe, I guess is a volleyball term you could use, and really kind of see who they're going to get. So to me, when I was watching them last year, the one player that really stood out to me is the number 2 overall player. That's Hallie Thompson. She plays for Houston Skyline, 6'1", but just uber athletic, whip fast arm. Just watching her compete against other people that are participating in the junior national training program, she really stood out too. Another one is Henley Anderson, who's 6'4", a little bit taller prospect, but for another Texas prospect who plays with Austin Skyline. She was really impressive as well too. And then the third one that really kind of stood out to me, or there's 4 of them that stood out to me, I should say. The third one is Audrey Flanagan. She's number 8 overall. She's from the San Diego area, 6'2". She really stands out of the court. I think she's redheaded, so she's really easy to pick out on the court too. And then the 4th one I will highlight is Gabby DeVita, who's from Detroit, 6'1" outside hitter. Same club as she plays with Legacy, who Harper Murray came to there. Played there, and then their incoming setter is the 2025 class, Campbell Flynn. She will she was part of that. She's part of that same program too. So those are the four. There's a couple others that are probably on Nebraska's radar, just that they've seen. Jaden Robinson, who's a teammate of Hallie Thompson from Houston Skyline, and then Arneal Watson, who's 6'4" from Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas, also has been around the Nebraska program too. So those are the ones that really stood out to me last year, and a couple other names to keep an eye on as far as outside hitters for Nebraska is going to look at.
What I notice about that group of players, not only are they all, top 20 overall national recruits, nobody really, it's a pretty national focus. There's not a local player on that last list. In fact, the first three we mentioned, Henley Anderson, Hallie Thompson, and Jaden Robinson, are all from the state of Texas, from Austin and Houston. Not an area where I'd say Nebraska has spent a ton of time, at least a ton of time successfully landing players from. They had Aiden Ames committed, a middle blocker from the class of 2024, I believe, and then she switched to the University of Texas. Nebraska's gotten Corey Cooper out of the state of Texas before from Amarillo. I'm sure there are a number of other players that are just not coming to. Yeah, Allie Batenhorst. If you go all the way back to Amber Holmquist was from Texas. She was from the Houston area, I believe. That's real OG Lincoln and Jeff Nebraska volleyball days, going back to 2003 or so. But it hasn't pulled like just real star player outside hitters out of Texas. So and part of that is because Texas is really good. There's some great programs in the state of Texas that would like to keep their talent home. So it'll be interesting to see. Texas can't take everyone, although we say that, and then they ended up with 15 transfers on their roster. But 3 of the top 5 players in the country and 3 of the top 5 outside hitters in the country are all Texas prospects. So we'll see if Nebraska is able to land one of them.
Yeah, for sure. Then I'll talk about middle blockers. There's a little bit shorter list, but there's kind of 4 people, 3 of which I believe were at the Dream Team camp last year too. I'll talk about those. The ones I saw was Lenny Tarnow, 6'4". She's from kind of the Chicago area. I think she's further out west Chicago suburbs. But again, just physical and presence at 6'4", really huge. I thought she had pretty good movement. Also another 6'4", another Texas prospect is Keani Williams. She's from the Dallas area. So that's the first time we mentioned that area. So another part of the Texas triangle. But she was, again, physical presence. And then the last 2 I'll talk about are L. Andrews, who's from Detroit, also plays for Legacy, 6'4", and she's number 25 overall. And then the number 3 overall prospect is Kayla Nawabuzi, who's again also plays with Legacy as a dynamite team. They got lots of three people that we've even mentioned here that are top 25 national prospects. So she's 6'2", but again, the people in that program are very familiar with Nebraska. 2 of their players are on the Nebraska pipeline, either will be here or are here.
Yeah, with Campbell Flynn and Harper Murray both coming from that Detroit area Legacy club, it's not a bad club to have a pipeline to. Just like, if you can get into that Houston Skyline or Austin Skyline or Texas Advantage club team, building those relationships are only going to strengthen you down the road. But it's not like Nebraska is the only school that's trying to get their foot in that particular door. So Lincoln's gone through the outside hitters and the middle blockers that we expect Nebraska to have conversations with when those can start later this week. What we don't have on the list right now are some of the ball handling positions like setter. Nebraska likes to most college programs too like to get setters every other year, so they're 2 years offset. Although I don't know, Lincoln, if you've seen that change with kind of the pattern of setters want to play like 4 years now. And if you're trying to recruit a setter, that's your pitch to them is like, hey, don't worry, our current starter is going to be a junior when you're a freshman. What kids are hearing now is, or at least the top kids, is like, wait, you mean I have to wait for 2 years before I have a chance to start? And you're seeing more potential 4-year starting setter. So I'll be really interested, and you can only have one setter because there's only one ball. So I'll be interested to see how that might affect Nebraska's setter recruiting cycles on down the line. If we get a chance to talk to Jalen again in the next couple months, it'll be interesting to talk with him about it. But, you've got Bergen Riley for the next few years, and Campbell Flynn was the setter that is going to be on the roster coming in 2025. So it doesn't look like Nebraska is going to be recruiting a setter in 2026. But once again, in the Yahtzee of college volleyball, you could be looking for one sooner than you think. And the transfer portal is also an option there. And also one position where Nebraska seems like they've looked locally, at least recently, is the ball handling positions with libero, defensive specialist. You've got one, Olivia Mauk, who's going to be on the team, and is, I forget, is Carrie Leinbach a recruit or a commit, or where does
she's 2025? Yeah, she's 2025. Okay. So they got two Nebraska girls, both of the freshmen this year, and then one coming in next year's too. So they've had quite the run of every single year. They seem to pick up a defensive specialist too. I mean, you go Lexi Rodriguez, you go Maisie Bosinger, you go Lainey Choboy, and then Olivia Mox. You got one, again, kind of like outside hitter. You want to have one every year, and it's an easier one to target maybe as a walk-on too. Libero, defensive specialists, don't always get 4-year scholarships, even when they are elite level. So sometimes they may get a 2 or 3 year promise of a scholarship. So if they're an in-state prospect, it's a lot easier for that NIL money to cover some of those expenses as well too.
Absolutely. Anything else you want to add before we move on to rotation 2 about potential recruiting targets in the class of 2026?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is just kind of a start list. This is not an exhaustive list. We didn't really talk about opposite hitters, but Nebraska could be looking for those. And we just mentioned about defensive specialists. So we'll see once those phone calls text messages start flying at midnight on June 15th.
People sliding into Snapchat DMs, things like that.
Really fun to say, hey, I'll talk to you in the morning. So I imagine Nebraska the last couple of years have been getting a commit or two right away too. So a lot of these people are already familiar with the Nebraska program, and either through coming to camp here or having teammates that are here in their club teams. So it'll make for a fun weekend, and we'll have lots of breaking recruiting news.
Well, we're going to turn our focus to the local in-state prep volleyball scene here in rotation 2. We got a great guest with Austin Kingsley, Nebraska scout with prepdig.com. Let's move on to our chat with Austin in rotation 2.
We're going to keep going with the recruiting theme, and we're going to bring on Austin Kingsley, who is a Nebraska scout with Prep Dig. Austin lives and breathes all this recruiting stuff every day. So, Austin, I imagine, is this your busy season because nationals are coming up, the 26 recruiting calendar? Prep Dig just dropped their 2026 recruiting rankings recently, too. I mean, is this the busy season for you?
Oh, yeah, definitely. As far as travel goes, hitting the big events around the Midwest and the country, and sort of just finish up the big wave of qualifiers. And then you have a couple of months where, recruiting and camps get into full swing, and then it's right into nationals in July. So it's definitely the packed schedule right now.
Well, cool. Well, I know the recruiting rankings, I mean, those are the easiest way for fans to digest who's good, who's that. I mean, could you pull the curtain back a little bit too? I mean, you're involved in that process. How do the recruiting rankings work? Are you talking to club coaches? Are you relying on your own kind of observations, college coaches? What kind of input goes into putting together? It's 150 that you all put together for a class, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of input from primarily 2 sources. One, you mentioned the club directors. That's a big part of it, where we take our evaluations, what we've seen, and we sort of compile a rough draft. And that might not be a specific order, or it's just a rough outline of what we're thinking. It might be even more than 150 names before we start to narrow it down. But then we sort of bring that out to the club directors and ask for their input. They'll have expertise on not only the players within their club, but within their region specifically, because even if they're not in your club, you're scrimmaging a lot of the other nearby clubs. You're seeing all this top talent. The other thing that helps us compile such a large list with a geographical reach is we go with a local approach at PrepDig where people are experts in their specific area or state. So, if we need help identifying, the California kids that belong in the top 150, we have California writers that will be able to provide their input and their expertise, and it's their region, their territory. I had special input on the Nebraska kids. There might be some biases there, but we all come together and sort of try to create a whole scale map that will really reflect what it is on the national scale.
Well, I'm glad you acknowledged that last part, Austin, because the recruiting rankings are pretty subjective, and it's not exactly like you're getting a bunch of input from neutral parties, right? You've got club coaches who are going to fiercely advocate for their players or maybe players in their region. How exactly do you navigate that and still try to kind of weigh the biases and the viewpoints among club coaches or college coaches or even the regional experts like you when putting together what's supposed to be a fairly unbiased list?
Yeah, that's kind of the challenge, right? Because I think one of the most common criticisms of a set of rankings when you're trying to compile a national list is, well, it's skewed more towards the Midwest, or it's skewed towards the West Coast, or Texas, any one of those areas. And it's so tough to navigate, but I think if you look at the qualifiers that you've looked at, particularly this year, where I think the qualifier season with USAV does a good job of going around the map and really including all the different clubs. And so I think if you start with your own unbiased opinion and form a rough draft yourself without any sort of input from somebody who might be biased towards their own club or their own players, if you sort of trust your own eye in the events that you've been to, I think that's sort of the launching point to be able to sort of comb through, well, is it skewed towards one area or another, to kind of work through that and sort of then once you have your baseline, then reach out to the club directors and sort of get down to the finer details.
All right. We're with Austin Kingsley, Nebraska's scout with PrepDig. You at the start of this, Austin, you laid out your travel schedule, and you're in the busy time of year. You go to a lot of club tournaments, and club tournaments. If you've ever been to one, some of our listeners have been to club tournaments. It's kind of just like thinly organized chaos. It seems like from the outside looking in. You're trying to see players on one court. You're trying to zoom over to see players with another. Maybe you're trying to talk to a coach or two, and there's like not anywhere to sit, and there's not a lot of room to kind of navigate. How exactly do you try to bring order to these chaos when you're trying to do your job at these tournaments?
Yeah, it's tough. I get a lot of questions about how I manage all the chaos. I get a lot of questions about what my step counter is at the end of each day. The big events, especially like President's Day weekend, where all the contact periods start and all the college coaches are flooding in along with all the parents who are there to, see their children compete. It's, you get in your flat Stanley reps where you're trying to weave behind people and not get into anybody's way. I think, the years that I've covered club has taught me a lot about how you can manage, your plan going in. I think it's important to go into a day saying, okay, this is my court range for the day, or this is my division for the day. This is the region I want to cover. At the start of it, it's like, well, I want to see as much as possible. I want to go, through all 80 courts and see as much as I can. But, eventually you do just run out of gas. And I think being able to sort of have a plan going in I think once you start to understand the layout of club events, it gets easier to make those plans and roadmap where you're going. It also helps that club events from year to year are pretty much in the same buildings, and you can be like, okay, I know the layout here now. I know where these courts are and how to get from one court to another. And so that's definitely helped as I've got more reps in the scene.
I imagine that your schedule is still you're focused on the Nebraska teams that are there and you're kind of following. I mean, but at any event, I mean, in Nebraska, one club could have 6 or more or 8, even more teams than that. How many teams are you watching during the course of a club tournament?
Yeah. I think the maximum, if you're just looking at the Nebraska teams, we had the Show Me qualifier in early April, which is in Kansas City. Between that covered 17s, 16s, and 15s, and that one had about 35 Nebraska teams alone in it. And so once you start to break off and cover some of the other regions, then it starts to grow really quickly where, I look back to nationals in Chicago last summer where there were pretty much, I believe, about 105, 110 courts running at the same time, which is impossible to cover it all. And they had to put it in 2 different sections because it's just so busy.
Yeah.
So I think, I could probably juggle a few different divisions at a time. And then you sort of, once you get more than that, you start to lose track of the big picture of, who's succeeding and who's getting to the final round and in contention for a bid. And, that's kind of the tough juggling act that we deal with in covering these events.
For sure. Oh, we've talked a lot about the process. Now let's talk about, actual players and things that you see. How deep is the talent in Nebraska? You talk about the different regions that produce a lot of college athletes. Nebraska's producing 10 or 12 recruits each class that sign with Division I program. Do you feel lucky that you're one of those major regions that gets to cover such a talent-rich state like Nebraska?
Absolutely, and especially in proportion to the population. You look at a state like Texas and California, their volleyball is great, but they have, so many more, bodies and players. And then you look at, little old Nebraska that has this big foundation of talent and the clubs that are going to support that talent. And so we're incredibly fortunate. And, you're not just seeing it in the big cities anymore. Sure, there are a lot of the established clubs are in Omaha and Lincoln. But I think you're seeing unprecedented club success in central Nebraska and the small towns, and they'll be represented at nationals as well. And so I think not only do you have such a wide talent base, but you also have it expanding on the club side, where the smaller schools are feeding into these smaller club programs outside the big cities. And that's been something that's great to cover as well.
We're with Austin Kingsley of Prep Dig here on Volleyball State. Austin, most of the class of 2025 is already set into place, knows where they're going to be continuing their careers in college. All eyes kind of turn this month to the class of 2026 because offers can start to go out later this month. Contact officially begins between coaches and recruits this Saturday if you're just listening to this podcast right when it drops. So who are some of the best players within the state of Nebraska, the best prep players that I guess the class of 2026 will be going into their junior year this year? Who are some of the players that folks should be keeping their eyes on, names to know?
Yeah. So it starts at sort of a common place in the high school scene, and that's Omaha Scott Catholic, with an outside hitter, Addison
Are
West.
they good at volleyball? Lincoln is Omaha Scott one of the good
teams? Might be. They may have won a few championships here and there. 9 in a row, trying to make it 10. Addison West is one of the featured outside hitters on that team, who started as a freshman, which is quite an accomplishment for such an established high school program. Obviously, 2 for 2 on state championships during her career. We've sort of seen her expand her role within that team, playing club for Premier, got the open bid this year and last year. So having national success as well. And then you look towards sort of closer to Lincoln and someone like Cameron Barnes, who is our second ranked player in the class, plays her prep ball at David City High School, which is
Butler County.
That's right. Becoming a very good hotbed of pin hitters. She's not the only high volume scorer on that team, but posted over 5 kills per set as a sophomore, which is just massive numbers. Plays up a year with the 17s. I know we talk a lot about 16s with this class right now, but playing up with 17s at VC Nebraska, got an open bid through Salt Lake City. So she's going to be one to follow, a lefty. So probably looking at playing on the right side, although plays a lot on the left side in prep too, just to get her as many swings as possible. Mm-hmm. And then you're looking down the line. I know Bennington has a really, really strong 2026 class coming up. And then you have Cammie Dierstad, who, a long line of Dierstad talent. You have her older sister is going to be a sophomore at Rutgers. And now you have Cammie coming up the pipeline as a libero prospect as well. So, anytime you're the libero at Papio South, that's a very high profile role. So that's sort of our top 3 right now. And then you can pretty much go down the line, and a really good small town core with this group too, that I think is going to be worth following.
Yeah. The one next on your list is Hallie Dolliver, who doesn't play. I mean, I've seen her play basketball, and she's a stud basketball too. How rare is that I don't think she plays club volleyball because she's probably heavy in basketball. How rare is that combination?
Yeah, I think especially for the small town athletes, it's more common to see that dual role, just because they're special talents like Hallie can pretty much elevate their school to a state championship competitor in both of those sports. She really got on our radar early with how big of numbers she posted as a freshman, and just continued that. And, Malcolm has become sort of the small town pipeline that's sort of in the Lincoln area. You look at someone like Jayla Zimmerman or Haley Densberger, if you go back even further. Those names have, been rewriting the record books at Malcolm, and now we have another one to be watching there. And so I think that's, being in the top 5 is really big for that program and for her too.
Austin, I look at the list of the top 10 prospects that Prep Dig has put out for Nebraska in-state talent, and there's not really like a 6'3" or 6'4" pin hitter. The state doesn't always have that kind of player like a Lindsay Krause from Omaha Skutt every year. But what it seems like the state has produced a lot recently is really talented ball handling players, that libero, defensive specialist, even setter position. Nebraska's produced some really good ones who have made their names at the Division I Power 4 conference level. And Nebraska's got a couple of those players on their team, the University of Nebraska. Now, what is it exactly about this state that sort of those skill positions, I'll call them, have been able to churn out a lot of really good players in those positions?
Yeah, I think, the established club programs in Nebraska have really done a great job in training those all-around skills. And, even if you have an athlete who doesn't have the height, if they can contribute in that ball control phase, the name I always think of in this regard is Sky McCune, who was an excellent outside hitter for both Gretna and Premier, but then goes to Creighton and makes an immediate impact as a defensive specialist. And Nebraska really has made that their hallmark, to be able to say, well, I can embrace a different position at the next level. To be able to understand, well, It might not work out for me to be a 5'8" pin hitter at a Power 4 conference, but if I'm setting the standard in the back row and in serve receive, that can make the difference in getting that big D1 offer. And so I think there's a foundation in the state of being able to train that and understand that could be a gateway to a D1 to a D1 offer, even if you don't have the giant measurables.
Yeah, great. And also, we've kind of gone through a little bit of what the top prospects are in Nebraska, and during rotation one, we kind of talked on who's on Nebraska's radar too. And there wasn't a lot of for this year, a lot of crossover too. I'll ask you if you think any 2026 players are on Nebraska's radars. I know traditionally they might take a defensive specialist or a walk-on. Do you think anybody is on Nebraska's radar as we kind of start this recruiting period?
Yeah, I would definitely take a close look at the potential for that walk-on in-state for the 2026s. I think it's important to remember that I think 26 is probably going to be a smaller class for Nebraska. And so that competition for the very few scholarships that they might have for 26 are going to be really competitive. But like you said, I think the defensive specialist or setter position, I think is going to be what's worth watching as far as in-state recruiting goes.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much, Austin. I wanted to ask too, when you're traveling around and you're watching club tournaments and you're seeing some of the best players in the country, come through this part of the world, are there any non-Nebraska club teams that you really make it a point to watch when you're at these tournaments, like a TAV or a Legacy or some of the out west clubs that manage to make their way here?
Yeah, definitely the TAVs, the Houston Skylines of the world. I know those are really big players in the national scene.
And sorry, just real quick for our listeners that aren't completely neck deep in the world of prep volleyball, TAV is Texas Advantage. It's one of the biggest clubs in Texas.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's must-see club volleyball when you have the rival Texas clubs facing each other. You think about, TAV facing Drive Nation for the past few years, and those are two Dallas area clubs that have gone back and forth, and Texas too pretty much interchanges their players every club season, and so you'll have folks moving around, and there's history there. The California clubs too have done a good job of moving out to the Midwest. You think of clubs like Wave and Coast. I think their style of play has been really fun to watch. You even get on the USAV side, you even get Puerto Rico clubs.
Really?
So you're looking at teams like Capitanes who come up north and end up at USAV and do a really good job. And I think you're seeing a lot of the East Coast clubs cropping up as well. North Carolina clubs with Triangle and NC Academy have done a really good job lately. And so those are sort of the corner to corner clubs that I think are definitely worth watching when, it's not just Nebraska in the spotlight.
Awesome. Well, good. We've talked a lot about Nebraska-based products. I mean, all those programs you talked about, all the different skylines or legacies that are all over the countries. I mean, who do you think in the top 10 maybe recruits is a good fit for Nebraska? When you watch them, you think, oh, that looks like a Nebraska style of player or somebody that would fit well into the Nebraska program.
Yeah, it's definitely a common conversation that we've had. Like when we're watching an up and coming player, it's like, okay, who does this look like at the collegiate level? Mm-hmm. I think of a Houston Skyline athlete like Hallie Thompson, who has that sort of Harper Murray edge to her on the court, has the same measurables and the sort of competitive drive too. You could even look at somebody like Gabby DeVita, who plays for Legacy, the same club that produced Harper Murray. Mm-hmm. And so that's definitely worth watching as well as far as Nebraska's target list for the 2026 class. Mm-hmm. It's just interesting to see how a lot of the sort of fits for Nebraska are nestled down in Texas, where obviously they're going to have a lot of recruiting competition there from the other universities there, where, I think if there's one program in America that has the same recruiting platform and pull that Nebraska does, it's the Longhorns. So,
and we talked about that a little bit in rotation 1 too. That's sort of a newer area of focus, I would say, for Nebraska. I mean, they've certainly pulled players out of Texas before and had commitments out of the state, but Nebraska traditionally hasn't focused that much on the Texas area.
Yeah, it's going to change in 2026, where I'd be very surprised if there wasn't at least one commit in the 26 class for Nebraska from the state of Texas. That's going to be a huge emphasis for this class. And so that's pretty much where you start, and then you work down the list, and you hope that you can poach players where you're going to be going up against some stiff competition from in-state.
Cool. Yeah. And we've talked a lot about 2026s, but I assume there'll be an update for 2025s coming up soon, or how much are you watching them, and when will you kind of tweak their ranking next?
Yeah, looking at doing that sort of maybe middle of the high school season, or at least in the wake of nationals, where we can sort of get a feel for, how the 17 open race shook out. And so that definitely plays a big part in it, and which athletes can show up on the biggest stage. And for us, that's nationals. Mm-hmm. And so having that updated sort of sample size, and obviously a lot of those top names on our list have committed. And so being able to sort of weigh that and look at how production changes over the summer and into the fall. It's, it's an ever-changing landscape, and there's new names that are going up. And so it's definitely something we're going to look at soon.
He's Austin Kingsley, Nebraska scout with Prep Dig. Austin, where can everyone find your stuff, your coverage, your contribution to the rankings? Give us some plugs.
Yeah, so you can find my writing at prepdig.com/Nebraska. Pretty much keeping a running tally on what's going on every day. So that's always worth a follow. Twitter.com/KingsleyATK. That's where, all my live coverage and navigating the club, chaos will live. So being able to juggle all that and be able to update things on social media, and that's where it all goes down.
Wonderful. Well, Austin, thanks very much, and safe travels as you're out on the road this summer to catch some more great prep prospects.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks again to Austin, and we are going to move on to rotation 3, where we are going to talk about John Cook got a new contract. It was a very short period where he was not the highest paid coach in college volleyball, but he is back king of the mountain. Signed a new contract that's going to keep him at Nebraska, or pay him at Nebraska through 2028 season. I think it runs through like January of 2029, but it'll be through the 2028 season. So 4 more years, and it bumps up his pay to $750,000 per year. And also he got a retention bonus, which is, everyone loved reading about this, because he released a statement right when that came out that he wanted to be paid in horse.
He's literally horse trading with Troy Dannon, Nebraska's athletic director. Yeah, and John Cook's new contract takes him through 2028, though I would, I don't have any inside info on this. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to coach through 2028, because that would put him, into his 70s. Although, what it really does is it gives you a full 4-year recruiting cycle that you're under contract for. And you see this in lots of other sports too, is no coach likes to be under contract for fewer than 4 years, so that they can go to the people they're recruiting and tell them, hey, I'm under contract for your entire college career. And so, it's not that like John Cook was ever in danger of being let go, most likely, but this does maybe take away a negative recruiting point, although I imagine you have schools out there already, and this isn't going to stop them from saying, hey, or, this coach could retire sometime in the next couple of years. Are you sure you want to go play with them? But, it's a very big sign of respect for sure for John Cook and what he's been able to accomplish. We don't know, at least as of this podcast recording, what the name of the horse is. We threw out there on social media. What do we know what the name is?
Is it just is it 415? Is that what it is? Or
well, yeah, but you can't name a horse like an assassin created in a lab. Like you have to give it some charming horse name, like, First Serve or Bald Set Spike or something. We threw it out on social media on the show's account, like wrong answers only on the horse name. And it really just provided our listeners a chance to be really mean and petty toward rival Nebraska coaches, which I encourage. But, we'll find out the name of the horse, like probably sometime at Big Ten Media Days. I bet he gets asked about it like no fewer than 3 times, but it allows him to sit pretty tall in the saddle when it comes to the national coaching landscape, which Lincoln, you wrote about a couple of months ago in your big story about college coaching salaries. He was already near the top. What this puts him, as far as we know, at least you could have a Stanford out there paying Kevin Hambley a lot of money and us just not knowing about it. But it puts him as the top salaried coach in the country as far as we can tell, right?
Yes. Yeah. He was number 1, and then Jared Elliott got his extension that kind of moved him up above Cook. And then John Cook went back up top once he got that new extension deal. And I expect another high level coach to have a contract extension here in the next few weeks, at least before the summer's done. I know all the language in that. But the other unique thing about, what we saw with both Elliott's contract and Cook's contract, they're figuring out ways to add additional compensation. Elliott had a different clause where he talked about he's getting paid for media appearances and image rights, where John Cook is getting a $1 million investment fund that kind of vests after this season. So, wow. Yes, I think.
What kind of livestock did Jared get? Did he get beef cattle or some alpacas?
Hopefully he got something good, or at least got some Austin real estate too. That's very
right. He gets like a boat on Lake Travis.
Yeah, but so the thing about that is that people were gnashing their teeth because Amy Williams gets paid more than John Cook, even though they're different sports. That they're still Amy Williams is the highest.
The markets are different.
The markets are different, but John Cook's also going to get $1 million that will be managed by someone at Nebraska that will vest, and he will have access to it at the end of the contract. So he'll be doing fine. He'll ride off onto the sunset in a very comfortable ways and be able to rope a lot of horses and cattle on his Wyoming ranch.
Absolutely. He really is just like transitioning into, the Yellowstone cast. Like he's trying to be John Dutton, and, probably just a couple years away from doing that as well. But, happy trails, but not too soon to John Cook, and congratulations on all of the money that you now have.
Yeah.
How's John Cook going to earn that money in 2024? Well, we have a little clearer picture of the hurdles in Nebraska's way right now as we move into rotation 4, because just hours ago, Nebraska's full 2024 volleyball schedule was released. We knew within the last couple of weeks, Lincoln, that Nebraska was going to kick off the season in a really big way, going to Louisville, Kentucky for the first of potentially 3 times this year. They're going to play in the AVCA First Serve, which is a season opening tournament. Nebraska has played in these big season opening tournaments before, but this is who they're lined up to play. They're not going to play Louisville in that, right?
They're going to play Kentucky,
They're going to play Kentucky and
Louisville and
Cook assistant Craig Skinner.
Yeah. Someone, someone called this the John Cook Invitational. Jacob Padilla from Hale Varsity called it that, because you have John Cook versus 2 of his former assistants, and Danny Busboom Kelly at Louisville and Craig Skinner at Kentucky, and then also his other former school of Wisconsin. So it's the John Cook Invitational.
So Nebraska is going to play Louisville and Kentucky, but not Wisconsin. Is that correct?
No, it's a single match. It's that one Tuesday. So Nebraska will play Kentucky, and then the second match will be Louisville versus Wisconsin. It'll all be on ESPN2. It's actually, they had to file a waiver with the NCAA because according to the bylaws, first matches aren't supposed to be allowed before Friday, August 30th, but they got they made their case, and the NCAA said, sure, let's do it. So it's a special showcase match. It's a Tuesday, so hopefully the sports world will be tuned in. And it's also, I don't know if you mentioned it, but it's the site of this year's Final Four.
Right.
They'll play at the KFC Center.
Nebraska could play 3 times in Louisville because they've got the AVCA first serve. Also on Sunday, September 22nd, Nebraska goes to play Louisville, which will also be at the Yum Center right on the Ohio River in downtown Louisville. And then it's the side of the Final Four. So if Nebraska has the season they hope to, they'll be going back to Louisville for a third time for the Final Four. Lincoln, did they ever figure out, do they get to start practice earlier because they start their matches earlier? That's one thing I know that John Cook has complained about in the past, that volleyball actually has the shortest amount of time in the fall sports from when you have your first season opening practice to when your first match is, because it always goes soccer starts first, then volleyball, then football. And I know they wanted to start practice maybe as early as late July in order to get prepared for starting the season on August 27th.
They did issue a blanket waiver to everyone in the NCAA to move it up 5 days, but that only puts you, I think, that first Saturday of August, which I'm looking up very quickly on my calendar. It's like August 10th, I think it was, the way the calendar falls out. But the issue that both Wisconsin and Nebraska run into is if you move it up 3 or 4 days to kind of accommodate when for that early start time that no one else is, you run into Big Ten media days. So they could start a couple days earlier, but the media days are that was it the 4th and 5th, or the 5th and 6th?
Well, they're going to have to move. Yeah. So, and it's too late to move big media days. So maybe people will be zooming in for that. You've already got your flight, you've booked your hotel with points. You can't change it now. Do you want to go real quick through any sort of high level notes of the schedule that was released? I don't know that we need to read through the entire schedule. No. There's actually a really cool little video that the Huskers social media account put through to reveal it. If you go to Husker VB, I believe is the Twitter account, you can see their little claymation release of the schedule. But Nebraska has some nice home matches and some manageable opponents too, with the Citadel and Montana State. The big non-conference match is going to be against Creighton on Tuesday, September 10th. Of course, that trip to Louisville we talked about on September 22nd. That's a big week for Nebraska because a couple days before, on Wednesday, September 18th, they're going to host Stanford, an Elite Eight team from last year. And so we've known all of that for about a month, but it's the Big Ten schedule that just got released today, and that's where your eyebrows go up a little bit when you take a look at Nebraska's Big Ten slate. Yeah,
I also want to give props to Huskers online staff, is that they're multimedia people. They did a good job. It's kind of a schedule unveil like the NFL does, make a big event out of it. Whereas at least on social media, all I saw was, here's our graphic of our schedule. So props to the athletic department.
This would be the Nebraska Athletic Department social media content team. No, we love the people at Huskers Online too, but there's too many brands in this space right now. Yes. That's why one of the reasons we went with Volleyball State.
Yes. So the first thing that kind of jumps up to me is the first weekend. Nebraska opens with home matches against UCLA and USC, and for the Big Ten. That's just a weird sentence that's going to take a while to get used to. Still,
welcome neighbors.
But it's both of their first away matches. I think they're both they're hosting Ohio State. It's kind of the other match that weekend. So Ohio State gets to go out to California and play both of the matches home, but both of their away matches are at Nebraska that Friday, Sunday of that first weekend. So welcome to the Big Ten. Here's the Big Ten champion that you get to be introduced to it. So that's the first thing that kind of jumps out. The other thing that jumps out is just the split. 7 of Nebraska's last 10 matches are all on the road. So the back half of the Big Ten, it's just going to be brutal, especially the 2-week period to kind of start November, the first 10 days, really going to make or break Nebraska. They're at Wisconsin, at Northwestern, at Oregon, at Washington. That's going to be a lot of travel and also just a lot of good quality competition.
Well, and as I'm looking at this, it jumps out that the Big Ten is now what, an 18-team conference?
Yes.
They're only playing 20 matches in the league schedule. So it's not like they increased the number of Big Ten teams. So if I look at this, I could probably pick out, real quick, the teams that you're going to play twice. They play Iowa twice. Who else do they play twice?
Wisconsin and Illinois, they're double plays.
Okay. So you get one match against Penn State. That's going to be in Happy Valley on looks like the day after Thanksgiving, Friday, November 29th.
Yeah.
If I have the date of Thanksgiving correct this year, maybe I'm wrong.
You do?
I do. Dang it. But Nebraska's, and then the Wisconsin is going to be on the road as well. So Nebraska gets a pretty tough schedule, but maybe all of the schedules in the Big Ten are going to be tough going forward. Everyone's got to travel a lot. Everyone's got some of these big time programs that they're playing.
The other big date to circle the calendars is Saturday, November 23rd. Both Wisconsin volleyball will play at Nebraska, and that's also the same day that Wisconsin football plays at Nebraska. So that would be a good day for Badger hate for all of our Nebraska listeners of all day Badger hate, and we'll see how it goes. Both could be very crucial matchups for the postseason.
The one match Nebraska is going to play against Minnesota this year is going to be in Lincoln on November 14th. So the Taylor Landfair Classic gets to be in Lincoln. Don't have to go to Minneapolis for that. And then Nebraska normally they have been given Penn State as a regular season finale opponent for the last several years. Penn State, they will play on the final weekend of the year of the season, but then the next day they go to College Park and end the regular season at Maryland, which could be a little bit of a trap game. Imagine if you're going to come off Penn State, you're still playing on the road. Maryland is a salty program. They're not one of the top programs in the Big Ten, but they're usually pretty talented and can put a scare into you. So if any Big Ten title hopes are still alive for Nebraska and are coming down to that final weekend, I mean, at Penn State, at Maryland, you're going to earn it if you close strong there.
For sure. Yeah. So we'll learn television times and also start times will be announced at a later date. Expect a lot of these to be on BTN, and some BTN Plus will have all of them that aren't. And then there's a couple matches will be picked up by Nebraska Public Media as well, too. So those will all be announced over the next probably month and a half to mid-August probably is when that will all be unveiled. So we know the schedule. Nebraska knows their path, and I just got to wait around for the matches to begin.
So to tide us over, we were looking at like 3 months until the start of college volleyball. Man, it would be great if something in the middle was happening to occupy volleyball lovers' attention before then. Well, guess what? We've got the Olympics coming up in July, and the U.S. Olympic roster was named just a couple of weeks ago. We moved
last week,
in
wasn't it? Yeah.
rotation. Yeah, just last week. And so that's our focus in rotation 5. The Olympic roster, some very familiar faces and names on this roster that Karch Karai has put together to try to win the American second straight gold medal in Paris. Many of the players, if not most of them, are veterans from that 2020 crew in Tokyo, including all 3 Nebraska alumni on that team, headlined by Jordan Larson, who we knew was going to be on this team. Kind of a formality, but she's the only player on this roster that did not play club for a professional club last year. Very famously, she was an assistant coach at Nebraska and then just kind of worked out on her own. This is going to be her 4th Olympics, which puts her in some pretty elite company as far as USA volleyball goes. Kelsey Robinson Cook is going to be her 3rd Olympics. And then Justine Wong-Arantes, the libero, this will be her 2nd Olympics as well. So all 3 former Huskers making multiple time appearances on this U.S. Olympic roster. Larson will be looking for her, not only is it her 4th Olympic appearance, they'll be looking for her 4th medal as well, because she earned bronze in let's see if I have this right. I have it written down here somewhere. Silver in 2012, bronze in 2016, and then gold in Tokyo in 2020. So let's run through the roster real quick. We'll start with the outside hitters, Jordan Larson, Kelsey Robinson Cook. Maybe are going to be the 2 starters when Team USA plays their first Olympic match in Paris. But then they're going to be joined by 2 newcomers, former Catherine star Catherine Plummer, maybe a little bit of a surprise, or at least was in a very competitive battle for one of those outside hitter spots. And then Avery Skinner as well, former national champion with Kentucky. So those are your outsides: Jordan Larson, Kelsey Robinson Cook, Catherine Plummer, and Avery Skinner. Your opposites. Yeah, go ahead, Lincoln.
I was just saying, I mean, the one thing that I think that really puts Larson and Robinson Cook kind of in position to play there, they've been playing a lot in the kind of the preseason stuff, is their passing. I think they do a lot of hitting, but I think what really elevates them to world class is their passing level too. So they should be playing a lot in Paris. So
yeah, Jordan Larson, Kelsey Robinson, clearly the two best passing outsides in that Team USA pool. The opposite hitters are going to be Jordan Thompson and Annie Drews. Drews is a veteran, former star at Purdue, who was a big time contributor on that 2020 Tokyo gold medal winning team. Jordan Thompson played at Cincinnati, is one of the younger players on the roster, but is a super dynamic athlete and has been putting up some pretty big numbers in the Volleyball Nations League. The middle blockers, there are three of them: Chiaka Obagu from Texas, Haley Washington, a former Penn State star, and then, of course, Dana Retke, who seemed like she played 7 years at Wisconsin, but is 6'8", 6'9", I forget. She's got great size, and this is going to be Dana Retke's first appearance in the Olympics. Those are the U.S. middles. Your setters, this is where I think it gets really interesting, Lincoln. There were three players competing for the two setting spots. Jordan Poulter and Lauren Carlini were the two that made the final roster. Poulter is the returning starter from the 2020 Olympics. She was a star at Illinois. However, she is coming off a very, very serious knee injury. She tore just about everything that you can tear in your knee about a year and a half ago, and she underwent a lot of rehab. This is kind of her return to competition in this spring with the international competitions, the Volleyball Nations League and the Olympics. And it is not, etched in stone that she is going to be the starter. So she was competing. Lauren Carlini, the former Wisconsin star, earned the second setting spot. But then you had Micah Hancock, the former star at Penn State, who was on that Olympic roster back in 2020. She's left off the roster this time. She could still be named as the team's alternate in case of injury, but she's not one of the 12 players named to the final roster. That was kind of the battle that everyone had their eye on when we knew that the roster was going to be unveiled soon. But ultimately, it's Jordan Poulter and Lauren Carlini that end up being named the players that Karch Karai is going to entrust to run the U.S. offense.
Yeah, and not to jump ahead to rotations, but I noticed that the last week of the Volleyball Nations League, they did take all three, and I think Haley Washington was left off. So, I mean, and you look at United States is kind of where they're at, what they need to. And I was surprised too with Poulter, because what you've seen from her, I don't know if she's back to the form that she's been in to make her an elite setter too. So like you said, so Hancock will be one of the alternates. There's four others. There's a pool of 5 of them that they have. They'll select one. They can take 13 players with them to Paris. The other, libero Morgan Hentz, outside hitter Ali Franati.
Ali Franti from Penn State.
Sorry, thank you. And then a couple, then outside hitter Kalia Lanier, and middle blocker Anna Stevenson Hall. So one of those, I think just because of the health questions of Poulter, I think Micah Hancock, she has the inside track to that alternate spot.
Yeah, when you're kind of comparing what Poulter and Carlini can do for you, Poulter has the trust of many of the veterans on the team. Obviously, Karch Karai trusts her. Carlini's a little bit better at this point just because she's not coming off a major knee injury with mobility. She can get to balls a little bit easier, run down errant passes and still put up good sets. I think she's a little stronger at the net as well as a blocker, and she's a pretty good defensive setter. Maybe excels over Poulter there as well. And so it'll be interesting to see who ends up getting the starting spot when the U.S. takes the court in Paris. And maybe we get a preview of that with the matches that the U.S. is going to play in the Volleyball Nations League, which is what we're going to touch on in rotation 6. So how exactly has the U.S. looked going into Paris in their tune-ups? And the answer is, not great. This is not a team that right now I would say is the favorite to be a medal contender. And I've said that online. I've had some people say, well, that's not really fair because the final roster is just now set. Like Jordan Larson, Kelsey Robinson are with the team now. Larson had been with them the whole time. Kelsey's going to be joining them now. Some other players, Annie Drews had just joined them as well. And I think one of the middles also might have just joined them. But you look at the Volleyball Nations League, which is the big tune-up tournament for the Olympics this year. The U.S. is 5-4. They have a match that's we're recording this on a Wednesday. The U.S. plays tonight against the Netherlands. They're going to play Italy on Friday and Japan on Sunday, and they need to finish strong just to make the Volleyball Nations League final, which is where it gets into the knockout rounds to win the title. The U.S. has won the Volleyball Nations League title a couple times before, but they have to finish in the top 7 to make the knockout rounds. And right now they're 7th. So they can't slip up against the Netherlands, Italy, or Japan. The U.S. has already lost in this tournament to some of the biggest powers in the world that are going to compete for medals in Paris. They've lost to China, they've lost to Turkey, Brazil, and Poland in the Volleyball Nations League. And I think there's some questions right now about, you've got to gel around a style of play with the roster that you're going to have same challenges that the U.S., soccer national teams have as well. Karch Kiraly has been leading this program for 2 cycles now, and he wants to go fast. He wants to run a super fast offense similar to like men's volleyball. It was super fast. In fact, they call it USA Fast. That's what they want their brand to be. And Jordan Poulter can do that, but it's not just the setter that you have to rely on to set that tempo and locate it well. You have to have hitters that it plays into that strength. And I think that going super fast plays into the strengths of Jordan Larson and Kelsey Robinson. Does it play into the strengths of your other outsides and your opposites like Catherine Plummer or Jordan Thompson? Those players might like a little bit of a higher, slower set where they can use their vision to make the best decision about where they're going to hit. If you set fast and it's not a great set, all you've done is trap set your hitters. And I think the U.S. has run into that in some instances recently against some really good defensive teams like Brazil and China and Poland. So the U.S. has some stuff to figure out as they go into the Paris Olympics, and they might not have many more matches to figure it out if they don't make the finals of the Volleyball Nations League.
Yeah. Right now they're playing in Japan right now. If they do advance, the finals will be in Thailand in a couple weeks. So I think what's good for the United States is that they need matches. They need to get more time, like you said, used to each other, used to that speed, and figure out what the best combination is too. But it's been exciting to watch it. Jordan Larson's been one of the better players on the court. And the matches that I've seen recently. And
she's been their best player, quite honestly, at the age of 38 that she is, like 37, 38. Sorry, Jordan. Like she has, without a doubt, been the U.S.'s best player these last few weeks.
For sure. Yeah, so that'll be something to keep your eye on. The women's go through the rest of this week. So by the time you listen to this, they definitely will have played the Netherlands and probably have played Italy as well, too. So we should know what they need to do in their final match against Japan. That's a hard way to close too, is against the Japan, their host nation, do it. And they probably will have more people than showed up in Arlington to watch them. So that was beautiful.
Which wouldn't be hard. And the U.S. has lost to Brazil in the first week of the tournament, I believe, came in Brazil as well. So the U.S. has had to play the host country in a number of these stops as well. They did beat France earlier this week, who's going to be the host country in the Olympics. France is not exactly a volleyball power, but there's going to be plenty of volleyball powers that the U.S. is going to bump up against in Paris when they try to defend their gold medal and win a medal for the 4th straight Olympic Games. So this is actually going to be our last show probably before it's definitely going to be our last show before the end of the Volleyball Nations League. Maybe we have a full Olympic preview show coming up in July. It's definitely going to be the last show we do before one member of Volleyball State has a fairly large life-changing event as Lincoln gets married in a couple of weeks. Can we tape? Are you going on a honeymoon? Can we tape a show on your honeymoon?
I'm not going to the honeymoon until December, so we'll have an entire college volleyball season before I go on my honeymoon. But if you want to contribute to that, I will take donations to help go somewhere warm in December. That's the plan too. So we're not.
Hey, you want to support Lincoln's honeymoon fund? You want to support the show? You can buy our Volleyball State merch at hurrdatsports.com/shop. I was wearing my Bald Set Spike shirt around the house just the other day, and that helps us support the show, kind of keep growing this volleyball community, so we can continue to do shows like this and more interesting topics in the future. Also, please subscribe and review. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Leave us a 5-star review. We would definitely appreciate that. And you can also subscribe to the Hurrdat Sports YouTube channel so you can see our smiling faces every time we pop up in your YouTube feed.
For sure. And be sure that you can interact with us on lots of different platforms. On Twitter, we're at Volleyball Pod. If you want to send the ideas, questions, comments, you can email us at volleyballstate@gmail.com. My Twitter is Lincoln_VB. And they can find Jeff at...
I am at by Jeff Sheldon, BY Jeff Sheldon on X, and that's really the only place I want you checking me out. Thanks very much to Brock Workman's filling in today for Cam and producing today's show. Thank you to Hurrdat Sports. Thank you to Austin Kingsley for being our guest today. And thank you so much for listening to another edition of Volleyball State.